Are you a student, mentor, or parent that loves robotics?
Then you're in the right place.
Up-to-date info on all things robotics. This
is the RoboZone podcast
with your host, Pete Ekman. The RoboZone podcast is brought to you by Kettering University. It's a Kettering-built world.
Hello and welcome to the 52nd episode of the RoboZone podcast. This podcast is for Tuesday, March 13th. In this episode, we catch up with some favorites. We're through week 2. We're going to see what we've learned and what we can look forward to. We have review for the first updates for the season. And finally, we have a new team of the week. So get ready, let's go, and we're going to get to first updates.
Now it's time for the first update.
In team update number 16, the content centers around the lights on the scale. We highly encourage everyone to read this update and know where the new light locations are.
The RoboZone podcast is brought to you by AndyMark.com, your robot parts experts.
With me tonight, I have some well-known names, and first here in Michigan. So we're going to start with John. Please introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm John Urine. I'm the coach of Team 684, the Chimeras, out of Lapeer, Michigan.
Next, we have Mike. Mike's our newbie.
Hey guys, I'm Mike Schreiber. I'm a 67 mentor, 27 alum. I do design and strategy for HOT.
Finally, we have Nick.
Hello, my name's Nick Clark. I'm an alumni of Team 2337. I've been reffing the past 2 weeks, and I'm ready to hop on the microphones for the next 4.
I bet you it's killing. It's just absolutely killing you, Nick, not to have that microphone in your hand. No response. I love it. Let's move forward.
I miss it.
I know you do. So thanks, guys, for coming on tonight. I know time is very valuable when it comes to competitive season, let alone build season. So I'm just going to get things right to the point. John, give us a quick update on how the Chimeras did last weekend.
We did pretty good. We made it to semis. Our climb wasn't working as what we hoped it would be, so we're going to end up changing that. We had some issues with our autons also. It seems like some of the components we were using, we are having some problems, or we're not integrating with them correctly, so we're going to adjust that also before Marysville. But overall, I think we did really well. Our scouting was pretty good, and we really liked our intake. Got a creativity award for it, so that was pretty cool. And overall, it was a good competition.
And Mike, I've had Nick and John on here last week, but you being new this week, tell us how Team Hot has gone on this season so far.
All right, sorry about that.
No worries.
So we were finalists in Southfield in week 1. Lost to the Bees in Avondale and I think it was Robo Tractors, 54-67. So that was a tough loss, but we're confident that we've improved our ramp and our intake for going into Milford next week, which is going to be a brutal competition.
And Nick, tell us how the reffing world for Power Up is.
Reffing has its ups and downs, but we saw some new strategies and some new things this week, and we discussed it and decided what was legal and what wasn't, and I think we did a good job this week. So
let's start there. What is legal and what is not legal, and what has changed in the reffing between weeks 1 and 2?
So no rule changes have been made. However, there were some strategies that were pulled out during week 1 during the finals that First has addressed, and we were calling the way that First wanted them called.
Can you elaborate a little bit more?
Yeah. So the first thing was an auton. I touched on this briefly last week, but any penalty that happens during auton is supposed to be called the way it is. The kind of ruling behind this and meaning behind it is that you programmed your robot to do that. There was a situation in Kettering the past week where a robot pushed all 6 of the cubes by the switch over. So that's a foul for every cube but 1, so that was 25 points. And then along with that robot also launched a cube during that auton, so that's 50 points in penalties that robot accumulated. So just First came out and said that any of those types of fouls that happened during auton are supposed to be called the way that they would be in teleop. And the other one, which me and Pete discussed this past weekend, was teams who would put cubes in front of the opponent's exchange zone with the purpose of trying to get them to rack up fouls for pushing that cube into the exchange. That has been addressed, and that is considered, I forget what rule it was, but that's not using the cubes the way that they're supposed to be used. I forget what the wording is with that rule, but that's misuse of the cubes, and so that's a foul for every cube that's placed in the exchange zone. So if a ref deems that cube was placed there for the sole purpose of messing up the opponent's exchanging robot and scoring in the exchange zone, then that should be called as a foul.
Now, Mike, have you seen the instance that Nick just addressed? Me and him saw it at Kettering, and we talked about it a little bit. Have you seen that in your competition where someone tries to sabotage the vault?
I haven't, but I watch the scale most of the time when I'm watching our matches, trying to figure out how to beat him on the scale. So I've been hoping that my partners take care of the vault. But what I wanted to ask about is this hurting penalty that's happening. Is 25 points a big deal if you have all 6 of those cubes? You can make that up pretty quick. Or when are they going to start yellow carding if you take all 6 of them?
Nick, that's a question to you.
In Auton, I don't think that. This is all to the discretion of a head ref, and obviously I'm not a head ref. But to me, how I would interpret that is that your Auton failed or something didn't happen, and that wasn't egregious. You weren't purposely doing that, so I want to give you a yellow card. However, we have to give you those penalty points. But if it were to be done during qualifications, during teleop, I would say that if you've done it in multiple instances, I would say that is egregious, and you might be given a yellow card for that.
And John,
I guess the question is if you do 6 in Auton, right, every match.
if you push all 6 of those?
Yeah, that's what I was wondering. But we can move on. I can talk to you about this later.
No, this is why we discuss things.
So in Auton, I think that if you do it, what I would do in that instance, and this is something that we were doing at Kettering, is we would send an inspector or someone who knows about programming and try and fix the Auton and try and figure out where the failure point is if they're not moving.
Oh, it's not a failure. I'm saying if you do it intentionally, right? Like, what if I decide strategically those 25 points are worth me owning all 6 of those cubes, and I do it every match? When do I get yellow carded? And I know it's up to the head ref. I don't have an interpretation of if that's legal or not.
That's to the discretion of the head ref if they feel that you're doing it strategically or not. That's all I got. That's all I got.
That's what I expected.
And I'm betting that Nick, when he jumps off this call, is going to jump back on the other call, and he's going to bring this up. So we're going to find out in week 3. So, John, were you at Kettering? Did you see what me and Nick saw but they would?
I saw a team accidentally do it. It wasn't actually against the enemy alliance. They went to go put a cube in the exchange, and since they didn't have an active out on their intake, they just released their pinchers right in front of the cube, and the next team that came up to go do it just pushed both cubes in, and then ref called it. So, which I thought was a good catch because like I've never been a ref before, but I know there's a lot going on in the field, so it would have been hard to see that. So, but that robot was purposely hurting 2 cubes. So,
the next question I have is for Mr. John Urin. You have a very interesting apparatus to climb with.
Yep. Pad, I think, is the correct word.
No, don't say pad. It needs.
No, I said pad with an H. We took it off.
We had. Oh, okay. So yeah. How are you guys addressing that issue and redesigning it?
So our whole thing going into it for people who haven't seen it, if you watch our reveal video, we basically have a hook on like a lever arm that's about 24 inches long. And so we deploy this hook, and then there's a rope coming off the very end of it, and then we climb the rope. And the idea is that would get us away from whoever's climbing in the middle. Our fear was there'd be a bunch of people climbing in the middle, and they didn't want to be anywhere near that other robot. And then what I learned at Kettering 2 is nobody really cares. They're completely fine with everybody kind of puts their grappling hook up, backs up a little bit, and then everybody goes at the same time. So with that being said, we're kind of looking at, because we know Thunder Chickens pretty well, we're kind of looking at their grappling hook design and then figuring out a way to implement that into our arm possibly. But for the time being, we kind of set the side climb aside because it would need a lot of rework to begin with. And originally we had 2 of them, but we were overweight with 2 of them. So we took one off, and then the one we had kind of gave us a little bit of trouble, and we only got 1 climb out of the whole event. So now we're kind of trying different avenues and looking at different things. So.
And Mike, how does Team Hot attach to the rung to pull yourself up? I know you guys have a buddy lift, correct?
So we deploy our ramp out the back, and then we lift we pull down with lead screws, actually ball screws, which are slightly more efficient. And when that reaches the top, there's a cable that pulls our actual hanging bar and flips it out. So that's all just linked off of the lead screws. And then we winch the ramp up to level, and that all comes up with a ball screw. And we were running into some problems with friction in that during the elims at Southfield, but I think we've resolved that issue for the most part. We had a shaft collar that was every time we bottomed out, it was slamming into the ball nut and tightening all the friction in the system. So we loosened that up, and our climb got like 4 seconds faster.
Oh, nice.
Nice. And how far up do you climb, Mike?
It's 18 inches of travel, and we have some. We don't want to use all of it. If you run those things to the end, all the balls fall out, and then our climber's kind of done for the season. So we climb up about 17 inches.
So while we have Nick on here, it's rare that I have mentors and a ref on the same time, but we've had this 2 weeks in a row, so I'm knocking on wood that we keep that going. But John, do you have any other clarifications for rules that you can ask of Nick while we have him on here?
Not really. I know there's this kind of weird thing with the first 2 events where the game design committee sees things happen and they're like, oh, wow, we didn't expect that. So I'm just kind of... I asked my questions at Kettering, really, with the head ref. So me personally, I'm good. But I thought it was kind of interesting, the evolution from week 1 to 2. So
what were the questions that you asked at Kettering week 2 of the head ref?
It was similar to the whole herding thing, where if you exactly what I saw, I asked it earlier in the day was one of my students asked it was, if there's a cube in front of the exchange and another robot's going to go push it in and they have a cube in front of them, is it hurting, or are they just trying to go A to B? And I knew he would kind of say it was hurting, but I was just curious how he interpreted it. And he's like, no, that is definitely hurting. I was like, oh, okay, well, that's fine with me then. So that's what I figured it was.
But these are things that you can ask right at the driver's meeting on the first day to get a kind of clarification for everyone in the building to know what the rules are.
Yeah, they were. But I didn't think it was going to happen because I thought most of those teams that didn't have an active intake would just open and then back up, close, and then push in. But I saw a lot of teams at Kettering just go up to the exchange, open their claws up in front of the exchange, and then drive away and never push the cube in. So, I didn't think it was going to be a problem, but... obviously it actually came up a couple of times.
Mike, was there anything at your competition that you guys asked of the head refs before the competition even started, trying to clarify the rules for the rest of the teams there?
Not at week 1, but I had the luxury of attending Centerline, Kettering, and Waterford last week. So I was talking to one of the refs at Waterford about hurting and just how many penalties are actually being called in this game, right? You lift your arm up and you're not even looking at the cubes in front of you. You're looking at the scale, and if you're going to run into it and you brush a cube and it's hurting all of a sudden. And the other one we run into is that we don't always clear out all the cubes between the fence and the platform that are in the platform zone. And we deploy our ramp, and now those three cubes that sit there are blocking our ramp. So obviously that robot has to move those cubes to climb up our ramps. By the rules, the way I would read them, that is clearing an area, which is in the definition of plowing, right? You're allowed to clear an area, but we were getting called for it at Southfield, and I don't know why. Even when we brought it up, and when I talked to one of the Michigan head refs, they said that shouldn't have been a penalty. So I don't know. I guess we're gonna have to argue it every match.
You want a rematch? You may get that rematch this coming weekend, I think.
No, I'm going to argue it every match.
Oh, argue it. I got you. But you do have a rematch coming up this weekekend, I'm just saying.
Oh, yeah, against the Bees, yeah.
That's what I was trying to think.
Hopefully it's not a rematch.
No. Well, you're saying hopefully you guys are on the same alliance.
Yeah.
So, Nick, did you see any of these hurting with respect to the cubes that are by the platform? Did you see any of those penalties?
Just for clarification on the platform, are we talking about cubes that were dropped by the scale, or are we talking about where are these cubes on the field that we're talking about?
These are the
perpendicular,
starting
right?
6 cubes that are right up against the fence.
Yeah, so it's to the discretion of the ref how we're supposed to be calling them is whether or not we feel it was strategic. Sometimes,
Gotta love that about first games, right?
yeah. So
Yeah.
So
I know
there's-
Nick saw him because he called some of the penalties on me.
yeah, it's tough how I personally was calling it. For some of them was like if you were to brush up, if you move the cube like closer to your scale, if you then went down and picked up that cube, I'd call that. It really is just to the discretion of the ref. And
So that's a very interesting interpretation, because what I was told this weekend when I asked about that is if it looks like you're trying to pick up one cube and you accidentally push them, it doesn't matter. But if you just push them, then you get a penalty. And that to me seems totally wrong. But
yeah,
I agree with your interpretation, right? If you're just trying to get them out of the way.
yeah, and there were I know that I personally got criticized by some of the teams at Kettering about the way that I was calling it. But to me, if you are struggling picking up a cube, you are not doing that strategically. You're struggling to pick up a cube. There's nothing strategic about struggling to pick up a cube.
So I need
So
to strategically make my intake worse.
you know what? Maybe I don't. But that's how I was calling it. I know that I was pretty lax on that rule. But we had a ref there who was definitely calling it a lot more than anyone else. So it's just to the discretion of the ref, and sorry, but that's how it is.
Yeah, and
I accept your apology.
that is how it is, right? And it's just the part of the game
Right.
that
Well,
we deal with.
My take it as if in the end game when you're going to try to climb, if you move the cubes out of the way to try to climb, isn't that part of like climbing? So it's not, you're not getting any points by, you're not picking those cubes up. You're just kind of brushing them out of the way, like you said, Mike, to get your climber to the point where you can get a buddy on.
Yeah, and the argument against that is that there's a strategic advantage to moving those cubes to your side. But in reality, everybody's coming from their scale side, and so they move the cubes towards the opponent.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, maybe we'll see an update. Every time I tape these things on Monday night, there's a rules definition change on Tuesday that I can't account for because I publish early. So we'll see what happens in the morning. Mike, is there any other questions or clarifications that you can help for teams that are out there that you've experienced when you guys played?
As far as rules, I think that's the main one that everyone's confused about. Is just when are you getting penalties as far as touching cubes? One thing I would like to point out that I see a lot of, if you have levitate, there is no point in parking 3 robots.
Oh yeah.
I'm snapping to that.
So I saw this a few times, and my favorite is the video of 118. I know we're all Michigan, right? But 118 has a partner on their forks, and their third robot comes up to park and just knocks that robot off right at the buzzer. So they got the points for the levitate because at time equals 0 they were above, but it just lands that robot right on its top. And the robot that came and knocked him off was parking completely pointlessly because levitate, it doesn't matter where you are, you still get the points.
Mike, and that's a great point, and I saw that at Kettering a lot where they had to levitate and then they would try to make it up there anyways and brush someone out of the way sometimes, and kind of ruins it for your alliance.
Yeah.
The other thing that I didn't understand, and I saw it multiple times, is me personally, my look at the power-ups is if I'm the drive coach of my team and we talk through the alliances, I want to activate boost first, levitate second, and then force third. How do you guys think about that, John? If you have 9 cubes right in the vault, how do you activate those power-ups? Which sequence would you use?
So for me, what we were doing was if we were on an alliance with anyone else that could climb, we'd always do levitate first because the hope was we could get the levitate, that we would climb, and then our other partner would climb. If I was on an alliance with somebody else who couldn't climb, like 2 other people couldn't climb, we would just use whichever power-up was more effective to where we were at in the strategy, right? So, like, if we had ownership of everything, we would boost. If we didn't, then we would use force and then boost, right? But for the most part, we would go with levitate right away if there was 2 other robots on our alliance that definitely could climb. But there was a lot of matches where like we were the only climber, and like I said, we only climbed once out of all of our matches. So we tried climbing multiple times, it just took too long. So in the grand scheme of things, we probably should have just stuck with like boost and then just tried to capture the scale early and then max out that boost and then go for it.
Nick, do you think the same way? I mean, if you're the drive coach, how would you activate those and in what sequence?
I think so. How I would play it out is I get levitate first, just like point value wise. Well, I guess if you have 3rd level boost, no, not even. Sorry. You'd always get levitate first because that's the most points you can get out of all those power ups. It's 30 points where the other 2 are giving you an opportunity cost of 20. So in that case, I'd always get levitate first. But then I just play it. If you own the scale, you put 3 into force or into boost. Sorry, and then if you don't own the scale, you put 2 into force. But I don't think that you want to get force up to 3. I think that your time's better spent somewhere else on the field than putting another cube into the vault, putting 3 into force.
And finally, Mike, how would you activate those power-ups?
I'm going to give the worst answer possible, and that's it depends. To me, it all depends on what your alliance is actually capable of. Are you going to get 9 cubes in the vault, or are you only going to get 3? If you're going to get 3 and it's qualification, no matter what, if you're only going to get 3, use them on levitate, right? Because that's 45 points if you count the 5 points a cube, versus potentially 20 or so. But the risk to that, to using boost or force first, is that you don't get those levitate cubes. So in elims in Southfield, we were using our other power-ups first, because we were confident we could get the levitate. And if we didn't, it's a 30-point hit. But there's also the swing factor of if they own the scale and you're using force, you're taking points from them too. So you got to consider that, and when you're going to own the scale, there's a lot of dynamics to it, and I am personally very confused about the lights on the field and when power-ups are activated, but I'm not drive coaching, so I don't mind.
Yeah, that's something I learned very early at Kettering too, was I had to look up at the scoreboard because even though I was convinced that we owned our switch, we didn't actually own our switch. So
I think it was easier when the lights were around the actual edge of the platforms on the scale rather than they are now.
I don't know if everyone knows why the lights were moved, but at other competitions, we didn't experience it at Kettering, but at other competitions, they were having issue with static interfering with the LEDs,
Okay.
where the LEDs would be flashing other colors or not lighting up at all. So if you were at one of those competitions, I think you would rather have the lights where they are now because it's more clear. But I don't know. I guess the issue that when it comes to the Switch that people don't understand is that the Switch will not change colors if the opposing alliance owns the Switch. If that makes sense, it'll stay that red and blue. The only time that the lights switch on the only time that the lights will turn on and off with the Switch is if the alliance that owns that Switch has it on their side. So there was a lot of confusion where they're like, "Oh, we thought that we owned it since our lights were on." Well, you got to check the other side and make sure that the blue lights aren't on. So just know what the lighting pattern is for ownership at each side is my suggestion to teams.
We're validating Mike's comments. He's totally confused. We're all totally confused.
I mean, yeah, you can read the rules, but until you actually see it, and they don't have a good demo video, and maybe they do, but I haven't found it, of what lights mean what. And that's not the end of the world, right? Teams will figure it out. But it's just, as an observer, not talking from a drive team standpoint, like as grandma watching in the stands, how are you supposed to know what's going on?
That's true. That's true. And I think this if you're not involved directly with a team, I think it is kind of confusing to know what's going on. Maybe they'll make some corrections. Maybe, I don't know, their LEDs, maybe they'll program them a different way to help out. I don't know.
That'll just confuse everyone even more, mid-season change, right?
It'll confuse us, yeah, because yeah, you're right. So, Mike, I have one last question for you. Tell all the teams out there, especially like rookie teams like myself. Tell us how we can help veteran teams more, because we want to be valued parts of an alliance. Ultimately, we want to get picked, to play in the playoffs. So how does a rookie team do that?
That's a really good question. I think two of the big things we look for is having a specialty, having a niche, having something that we know we can count on you to do. In this, for example, in Southfield, we picked 7218 because they did nothing but the vault, right? They put 8 cubes in the vault, and they had a wide chassis that could drive up our ramp. That's pretty much it, right? You need to look like you know what you're doing, and like you're not just gonna cause a bunch of penalties, and that's one of the biggest things.
And John, can you answer that question as well, please?
Yeah, I would say reliability is the big thing. So if there's anything that you can do reliably and consistently, like you can get good at cycling lots of cubes in the vault, then that's awesome. And bigger teams that are in picking positions will want that, right? And just being consistent and fast. I know a lot of teams fall into this feeling of like, we got to cycle one student through the drive team, the whole competition. But the problem with that is then nobody will see what your robot is capable of with your best driver. So kind of picking your driver early on, committing to that drive team, and then doing that whole competition, I think, is important, because that just kind of boosts your reliability. Because if you're in a match and you're only putting 2 cubes in the vault every match, and then one match you put not all 9, it's like, oh, that's great, but they didn't do that ever. So yeah, just kind of tailing off that, just reliability, consistency, I think is important.
Impressing the scouting teams. That's basically it, right?
Well, that's a really good point that John made, is that the veteran teams usually have match data on every robot and everything, right? So if you put in 9 once, we're going to know it. We're going to know what you're capable of, and we're going to find out why.
And
my first match at Kettering was with 7144, and they came right out of the gate. They're like, this is our first match. We have no idea what we're doing, blah, blah, blah. And I was like, okay, well, let's set a reasonable goal. Why don't we try to do this and then go from there? And they're like, yeah, that sounds great. And they were completely honest. And, I don't know if that affected them getting picked by the number 1 alliance and then taking it the whole way, or if it was just the reliability of their robot or just their attitude. But I think that's a really important lesson for rookies, and they should stick with that kind of demeanor. I think that's really good.
Attitude is very understated. That's also a really good point. I want to emphasize that if you're fun to work with, you're much more likely to get picked.
Nice.
Yeah.
All good pieces of information from 2 of the best mentors I know. Nick, and that wasn't cutting Nick short. I just want Nick to answer a different question as he leaves. Nick, you're going into your MC spot, correct? So give us some information on how we can make things run faster for a competition coming forward.
Use the technician. The technician's purpose is to help with communication problems, to help get the robot on and off the field, move the cart wherever it needs to go on the field. Just use the technician, because a lot of teams were just kind of like pushing the technician away. Use them, please. They're there to help us. They're there to help you. It's my favorite change this year was that they're allowing 1 person onto the field. So make sure that you're using your technician, and also just work with the FTAs. Make sure your firewalls are off. Just be ready to have someone tell you that your things are wrong and that they need to be fixed.
Yeah, they're there to help. Always to help, and trying to get the matches to make sure they run on time.
Yep.
So as you guys sign off, please again tell us your name, what you do on your team, what team you're from, what you do on the team, and then how we can follow your team. So we're going to start with you, John.
Yeah, I'm John Urin. I'm the coach for Team 1684, the Chimeras. I'm also the drive coach, and then one of the lead engineers. To look at any of our stuff, you can go to our website at first1684.com, or Facebook at first1684, or our Twitter and Instagram at Chimeras1684. And then occasionally I'll upload a vlog on our YouTube channel. I haven't done it in a really long time because I've been a little busy trying to make our robot be awesome. So, and that's just the Chimeras FRC Team 1684.
And Mike, we're going to go with you next.
I'm Mike Schreiber. I'm with the Hot Team. I'm a design and strategy mentor, Team 67. How you follow our team is a really good question. We have a website. I haven't been on it in a while, so I don't know what content is out there, but it's Hot Team 67 something like that. You can Google it. And we have Twitter and Facebook, but I don't follow those either. I'm kind of embarrassed
I
to
will
say
research that for you and put it in the show notes. So we got it.
All
covered.
right. Thanks, Pete.
And finally, Nick.
Hello, I'm Nick Clark. I'm an alumni of Team 2337. I've been helping out and mentoring Team 1684. If you want to follow me, my Twitter is @NickSharkClark, and I'm excited to finally pick up a microphone.
And Nick, what is the next event you're going to?
I'm going to be at Lincoln this weekend.
I want to thank everyone for coming on the podcast. I'll earmark you guys for later on in the season. Let's see who makes it to Michigan State Championships here in the state of Michigan. We all have to qualify. So I want to wish all your teams good luck, and thank you for coming on the podcast.
Up now is the RoboZone Rookie Rundown.
If you listened to our last episode in the Rookie Roundup, you would hear that Brandi Bolinger and 2337, the EngiNerdz out of Grand Blanc, were going to compete at the St. Joseph District here in Michigan. We are giving Brandi the week off from Rookie Roundup. She will be returning next week, so get ready to listen and hear about her experiences at the St. Joseph District. So we look forward to talking to her next week. And Brandi, if you're listening, get some rest.
Up next is the RoboZone Team of the Week.
For this week's Team of the Week, we have picked the Killer Bees, Team 33, out of Auburn Hills, Michigan, and out of Notre Dame Preparatory School. Team 33 spends a lot of time in the community, helping others and helping foster other robotics teams. So, for that reason, we are picking Team 33, the Killer Bees out of Auburn Hills, the Team of the Week. Congratulations. And with that, ends the 52nd episode of the RoboZone podcast. Thank you for listening to the RoboZone podcast. Don't forget to subscribe and listen every week. You can find us on iTunes Music, Google Music, and SoundCloud. Thank you for listening. We look forward to seeing you next week, and let's get ready for week 3.
The RoboZone podcast is brought to you by Kettering University. It's a Kettering-built world. Thanks for listening to the RoboZone podcast with your host, Pete Ekman. Find us online at RoboZoneTV.com and on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, and Instagram.